know that these Zionist one percenters are also giving the majority of money to the Jewish federations and the Jewish Communal Fund, and not only supplying them with their money, but directing where their money gets invested. These one percenters then have an undue amount of influence over Jewish philanthropy in this country and are able to direct their money to organizations like this is just a sampling. I've been able to, through the sort of research into the tax returns of the groups you've seen, been able to trace the bulk of the operating funds for all of these groups. And I'm sure we know some, I'm sure some of these names are familiar to all of us in this room. But the fact that all of their funding comes from the same 10 sources should supply us with what we need in our efforts to push back against them. It's incumbent upon us to say when we encounter backlash from some of these organizations that this is not the voices of a Jewish grassroots movement, but rather the vehicles for the 1% to have even more influence over the Israeli-Palestinian conversation in this country. And I think the last thing I want to say is that these beneficiaries all have a not only common ideology, but actually a common membership. Daniel Pipes and his Middle East Forum, who, just as a quick example, sits on the board of the Amha Initiative, the Brandeis Center, CAMRA, the Lawfare Project, the Israeli Campus Coalition, and Stand With Us, and is a founding member of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. That's just one example, but I think it sort of crystallizes where we're at right now. The ability with the resources that they have to create the illusion of a grassroots movement against an anti-Palestinian grassroots movement is actually just the product of rather than sort of fund one large voice, they decide to fund many small voices. And the reason seems to be to protect their investments both in weapons and oil, because as we all know, a very strong Israel means a destabilized Middle East, which means that they're offshore drilling in places like the Gulf Coast, they're fracking in places like Pennsylvania, return an even greater on their investment. And I think that's a pretty good overview. Sure, I think the case of Hillel is very interesting because almost all of those people, Sheldon Adelson I think is a classic target, but he gives millions to Hillel International, and he also gives millions to individual Hillels throughout campus. And Hillel, the David Project, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, Stand With Us, and Aish HaTorah, all of whom get the bulk of their operating funds from, again, these same sources, combine to provide over 300 different interns or paid employees, Jewish students whose job it is to either A, say how unsafe they feel, and they all say the same things, which is no coincidence. Every article that's been written in Boston student newspapers that attempt to say how scared they are have all been fellows from either CAMRA, Aish HaTorah, the David Project, or the Israel Campus Coalition. The Israel Campus Coalition is an umbrella group which contains membership of all these people, but also gets its own money to do its own work. It's very important that we sort of realize that no 18-year-old Jewish student wakes up one day without sort of like any pushing along and says, you know what, today is the day I am going to write a pro-Israel op-ed in my school newspaper. That just doesn't happen. But what does happen is Camera pays them, and not only pays them, but writes the articles for them. And then they publish it in the school newspaper and creates this ridiculous notion that Jews are unsafe on a US college campus in 2014. That's not an accident. That is a strategy, and we'll talk more about the strategy in a second. Oh, I'm sorry, this is very important. In addition to funding the campus groups, they also fund media. They also, I'll just take Commentary Magazine, which is a neocon rag which frequently targets SJPs and members of the U.S. Palestinian community. All of their operating funds, it's published by Seth Klarman, who also publishes the Times of Israel. I don't know, I'm sure there's many people in the room who have been smeared by someone here, one of these media outlets. And it's just important to know where that money is coming from. And it's coming from the same people who once these articles come out, express concern to university administrators. Okay, sure. I think it's important to sort of understand that, this, I touched on this, but the central logic of the vast majority of the Islamophobia network, and by Islamophobia network we mean things like the appearance of the Third Jihad DVD in 17 million different swing voters' homes right before the last election, which sort of vaguely accuses Obama of being in the Muslim Brotherhood. If only, right? What's important to understand is that this Islamophobia network is motivated by Zionists. It's funded by Zionists, and Zionism is what drives the concerted effort to demonize and other American Muslims in this country. And I'll be right back.
Okay.